Turron Davenport, USA Today, Eagles Wire at the Combine, taking a look at some of those things. But, Turron, we got a lot of Eagles news to break down here before we get to what's happened at the Combine. How are you, pal?
I'm doing really well, man. Out here at football heaven, so, I can't help but smile.
Well, football heaven, and I know a soft spot for you is wide receivers as well. And the Eagles being attached to a lot of wide receivers, both in free agency and also the trade. What is your take on the possibility of the Eagles being engaged in talks with the Saints for a guy like Brandin Cooks?
Yeah, it's really interesting that this whole thing is coming about, because this is something that I presented back in November after one of the games where Brandin Cooks didn't even get a target. I know he was upset about that, and any receiver that's not mad about not getting the football isn't a real receiver. So when you look at just the way things played out, Michael Thomas came in out of Ohio State, and he's become a primary target as well as Brandin Cooks, because he did still have a 1,000-yard season. But at the same time, you got a team in the Eagles that's looking for a guy that's an impact player. And apparently, according to the report by Alex Marvez, a second-round pick and maybe some help on the defensive side of things could get Brandin Cooks. So you look at a guy like a Michael Kendricks, a guy like a Connor Barwin. In New Orleans, they need pass rushers. You got Hiloki Kikaha out of Washington, who is always injured. He's a guy they used the high pick on before. And then Kasim Edebali. Man, I feel bad for the play-by-play guy, by the way. But yeah, Kasim Edebali is a guy that out of Boston College that they use on the pass rush side of things. But Connor Barwin can go down there and be effective as an edge rusher for them. So he's someone that could be a possible trade. I think it's something that could definitely work out. We just have to see how it plays out. I know some people are not as high, like Seth Joyner isn't high about the, acquiring Brandin Cooks, but at the end of the day, he's a playmaker, and he's someone that they could do a lot with in their offense, and he stretches the field. Yeah,
there's ranging sources of compensation, but Alex Marvez from Sirius Satellite NFL Radio has basically said a second-round pick gets the job done. Is that a deal that makes sense for Philadelphia?
Oh, it 1,000% makes sense. I mean, you look, even in the first round, we've talked about drafting a receiver, Mike Williams, Corey Davis, John Ross. These are all guys that if you drafted them with the number, 14 or 15 pick, you want them to develop into an impact player. You're using a number 2 pick, a second-round pick rather, and you're getting a guy who's already an impact player, a guy who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, a guy who is young. He's younger than Carson Wentz, so you could have him on the roster at $2.2 million and then exercise his fifth-year option at $8.5 and 2 years, $10 million. That's not bad for a guy with the explosiveness of Brandin Cooks.
Turron Davenport, USA Today, Eagles Wire. Turron, Brandon Marshall released, Stills free agent, Jeffrey. We got a lot of other names. Anybody that you think is the best fit, or Garcon and Jackson. There's a lot of them out there, but is there somebody that you think cost and scheme fit makes the most sense?
Well, I think Kenny Britt is definitely a cost and scheme fit. You have the familiarity with Mike Gill, the current Eagles receiver coach. He was there last year with them. 1,000-yard season out there in L.A. with the Rams. I talked to Les Snead about Kenny Britt. He did emphasize that he wants to have good players get paid. So, there is a possibility where he goes back to the Rams, but we'll see what happens there. I think Britt is a really good match, a big receiver. He is 28. I think he's be 29 by the time the season starts, but he's a bigger body. He's a guy who had a positive impact on the younger receivers there in L.A. He worked with Farrell Cooper. He worked with Tavon Austin, spent time afterwards, practice, during training camp. You saw that in the Hard Knocks videos, that series that was out last summer. So he's a good fit, and, he's someone that wouldn't cost a lot of money. $12 million a year for Kenny Britt is absurd. I wouldn't pay him that in any way. I wouldn't pay $14 for Alshon Jeffrey. And, I think Kenny Britt's a good fit.
He would be interesting. Rutgers guy, 28 years old, has bounced around the league a little bit, and as you mentioned, familiarity with Mike Gill, who was the new wide receivers coach. You're at the Combine. Where is wide receiver depth? 14th, the Eagles end up picking. Is there going to be depth that they can say, you know what, second round with that number 42 if they don't end up moving it for a guy like Brandin Cooks? But what does the wide receiver depth look like in this draft down there at that Combine?
Oh, there's plenty of depth. You got second round, you got third round, you even got the fourth round. A guy like a Josh Reynolds can be acquired, on day two, and he's someone that stretches the field. He's not a burner. He is a track guy. He ran the hurdles, but he's not, someone who just generates instant speed off the line. But you allow him to build up that speed, and before you know it, he'll eat up that cushion, run by a defensive back, stack him, and make that deep catch that you want him to make. So he's someone to look at. Katie Cannon. Everybody's got this craze over Kenny Stills, but Katie Cannon is a similar player, and that he could do well on the outside as a guy that's, just around 6 feet. He could excel down the field that way. He could bump inside and do things from the slot. So he's another one to look at. Carlos Henderson out of Louisiana Tech. You're talking about an ultra-explosive player. So these are guys that you could go to. I mean, even Chad Williams is a guy out of Grambling that could do a lot. At the top, obviously, you have the big three, but Isaiah Ford is another one to look at. I talked to Steve Smith, Sr., the former Ravens receiver. We sat and talked receivers for a good 20 minutes, and we both came to the same conclusion that Isaiah Ford is a guy to watch. And it was funny because I was talking to one of the Ravens reporters, and I mentioned Isaiah Ford to him before Steve came over, and we got to talking about him and, different guys that he liked, and he mentioned Ford as well. So Isaiah Ford, big body, about 6'2", right around 200 pounds, and he's a down-the-field threat. He's a guy at Virginia Tech that really stood out. I think he's a really good player. You could probably get him in the third round. I don't care how he runs here. I know when you turn on the tape, you see him go down the field, he does the things that you need to do as far as attacking the football. He's very similar to an Alshon Jeffrey type of receiver. One of those guys that you just throw the contested catch to, contest the ball and let him go up and get it.
Turron Davenport at @Davenport_NFL. You write that the Eagles have met with multiple running backs at the Combine. Is that first-round material? Is that something just doing some due diligence? And I'd also get some comments from you. Jamal Charles, obvious connection with Doug Peterson. Peterson sounded like they like to kick the tires. Howie didn't sound like he was as enthusiastic about going down that road. So running back is an interesting off-season spot for this team.
Well, I think that all is going to revolve around Ryan Matthews' health. If he is proven to be healthy, then they could release him, and recoup that $4.5 million. If they have to do an injury settlement, then that's a different story. So I think that's where it starts. But from there, yeah, of course, you're going to have a little more excitement when Doug Peterson talks about Jamal Charles and Howie Roseman, because let's face it, Doug Peterson found a lot of success with Jamal Charles. So that relationship is there. So, they definitely are going to kick the tires on him, so to speak. We'll see what could happen. I talked to some of the Chiefs guys, and they said, if you watch him from last year, the few carries he did get, he did show some explosiveness. He did show, that he still has some of those traits that made him an outstanding running back. So we'll see what happens there. As far as at the Combine here, they're talking to a lot of guys. And, I think that's something that you have to do, especially this draft has depth at running back at later picks. A guy like a Jamal Williams out of BYU, Joe Williams out of Utah, these are guys. And even at the top end, there's depth after you get past Fournette and Dalvin Cook. You got a guy like a Kamara, a guy like Dante Foreman, if you want to go that route, which I wouldn't suggest. But, there are options for you, second, all the way from the first all the way down to the fourth round, that you could come in and get somebody that could help you out.
Turron Davenport's with us. Yeah, you listed a bunch of running backs. If you check out Turron's Twitter at @Davenport_NFL, a bunch of different names there. And then in the other spots, corner, Turron, any insight on what that position will look like at this draft that you're down there at the Combine? It's supposedly a deep spot for that position.
You remember a couple years ago that the draft with Jordan Matthews, Odell Beckham Jr., Kelvin Benjamin for the receivers. This draft could be the same type of draft for the corners. At the top end, you got Sidney Jones. You have, You know, a guy like Marshawn Lattimore. You got both the kids out of Florida. There's so many. Marlon Humphrey, you know. But when you look at the other guys in this draft, DeMonte KZ is a guy I actually came on this show and talked about before out of San Diego State. You're talking about a 2-time conference defensive player of the year. Definitely a really good cornerback. He could play the nickel. He could, you know, bump outside and hold his own there. Akilo Witherspoon is another one out of Colorado, 6'3", 190 pounds. You know, he's someone that stood out to me in all my study watching John Ross. He had a really good game against, you know, Washington, and he's long, and he could turn and run. Very good movement skills, patience. That's definitely there for him. Treston Deku out of Oregon State is another one I saw at the Shrine Week, and he really stood out. Again, we're talking about a guy, 6'3". Now, this one is 210 pounds, but he could turn and run. You know, very nice baseball turn. Doesn't fall for double moves. So those are guys. I mean, Marquez White out of Florida State, he gave up 2 touchdowns in 4 years. You know, he's definitely a solid cover kid. And then even right in the backyard, right in Philadelphia, Nate Hairston out of Temple. Nobody's really talking about him, but I know that Joe Douglas has his eye on him because at the Senior Bowl, he was asked about Temple kids, and he smiled and looked at me because we both saw him there, and I saw him talking to Nate Hairston, you know, so that's another option. And Nate is a guy that's very similar to Tavon Young, who was drafted by the Ravens last year. You know, you're talking about footwork, you know, quickness. You know, that's what you want out of a corner. Toughness, that's what you get out of those Temple guys. So I could go on until 5 o'clock talking about these corners. There's so many of them. So it's definitely depth, and I think this could be a monumental draft class at the cornerback position.
We'll have plenty more throughout the day. Turron Davenport is at the Combine at @Davenport_NFL. If you want more information till 5 o'clock, he'll be tweeting away down there when there's the media availability. Read his stuff at USA Today, Eagles Wire. He's got a piece on Temple guard Deion Dawkins for the Temple fans out there. Check that out as well. We'll keep our eye on anything Eagles. Turron, football heaven, continue.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot. I'll talk to you guys later.